To start off this story, it took place 4 years ago. I'm now 17, 5'8" male, and recently found your channel due to some other weird occurrence that happened to me recently, but that is for another time. This took place in December when I was 13. We just had dinner at a local restaurant, and we decided to stay at my grandma's house, so we hopped in the car and drove over to her house. We got there at about 8 and noticed something off about the house. We visit my grandma every weekend ever since I was young, so I can sense when there is something off. I was just about to set my belongings on her brand new couch she'd just bought when I noticed little footprints all over the bottom of my seat. I thought that it was a bit strange, so I went over to my mother, who doesn't believe in ghosts, but in spirits. At first, she didn't believe me and said I was just being a kid. But when I told her to go look at the couch, she was as equally as shocked as I was. My mom asked my grandmother if my little baby cousin had been over that day. My grandmama replied that he hadn't been over there in 5 days. And also, she said that she hadn't checked the couch before she left, and there wasn't a single footprint. My mom brushed it off and decided it was nothing. My mom is a realist as well. Later that night, my mom tells me it's time for bed, so I crawl into bed. We went there so much I had my own bedroom. As soon as I hit my pillow, I got a sense of uneasiness, like something was watching me. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, so I attempted to fall asleep. But I still had the sense that I was being watched. I usually never get this vibe from anyone or anything. Anyway, I decided that it was not smart nor safe to stay in that room anymore. So I decided to quickly pack my things and hurry down the hallway to our living room where my mom was. She was annoyed I woke her up because I was feeling something weird in my room. But I told her I did, and I didn't feel comfortable staying in that room. And so I set my things down near the TV and attempted to fall asleep. I had slept for almost an hour when I was awoken by a presence or somebody behind me, which is impossible because I was right behind a sewing machine and that older than my grandma, and it was too big for a person to stand behind. But I knew if I turned around, I would regret it. So I just waited and waited for what felt like hours when in reality, it was only like 30 minutes until I worked up the courage to turn around to see what I saw. To my horror, I found a baby's handprint right on the pillow next to my head. I froze, not knowing what I just discovered, but knew it wasn't there when I placed my head on the pillow. I was able to gather myself and turned right back around to attempt to sleep through the night. That didn't work. I instead was so paranoid that I lied awake all night, worried about what's going to happen next. At 3 a.m., the devil's hour, I was just about to doze off until I heard a sound. It sounded like bells or somebody knocking on metal. I just decided to stay put and not investigate. I'm glad I did. The bell's noise went away after 3 a.m., and I relaxed and decided to think my own thoughts. At 5 a.m., my mom got up and went into the kitchen to go get coffee. I got up as well. She asked me how I slept. I told her terrible. She laughed, thinking I was paranoid until I showed her my pillow. She had a look of confusion, but also tried to rationalize the whole situation and told me that it was just a dirt smudge. I got pretty frustrated for her not believing me, but I sighed and knew I know what I saw. Now, ever since this incident occurred, I've had weird and scary incidents happen to me up till recently. 2 weeks after we stayed, my grandfather was taking a walk and he fell on his hip and broke it. He was rushed to the hospital and survived the surgery for his new hip replacement. But sadly, he began losing his independence and now presently has broken his hip twice, gotten real sick, and almost died a few times. Meanwhile, my family had their own issues, but that's another story for later. I will never forget this incident, and I hope whatever demon or thing was there that night, could you kindly fuck off? I live in a rural area in the Midwest, one of those areas that have nothing but acres of land around you. I came to learn a few years ago, the land where my house was built over 80 years ago, was once a farmland with slaves who were chained up in the wooden cabins when they weren't needed. Honestly, hearing that story broke my heart, and I hoped and prayed that those slaves found peace in the afterlife. When we first moved into this house, there was an old barn that was still standing a bit far from the house, but I never went into it, and turns out the owner already sold the barn before he sold us the house, and it was due to being taken down. It wasn't long before a crew came in and started taking it down, but before they could finish it, ended up collapsing and coming down on its own. We're the last house on the street, and a bit further down the road from my house is a very tiny, old, and what I assume to be a family-owned cemetery. And when I say old, I mean so old that you can't even read the names on the tombstones, which are very thin and clearly were handmade. And because of that little cemetery, I always had a feeling these houses would be haunted. And I can't speak for my neighbors, but I definitely know mine is. But that's another story. My room is on the bottom floor and faces the backyard, and also the stairs that lead up onto a landing that leads up to the deck. And one autumn night, I'm sitting in my room with the window open, enjoying the cooler weather, when I heard someone walking up and down the stairs. I think it's my uncle, so I didn't bother to look, but after I kept hearing those footsteps, wondering why he could have been walking up and down them so much, and I became confused when I looked over and saw absolutely no one. I got up, walked to the window to see if maybe it was my uncle, and he just stepped out of view. But no, there was no one. A few seconds later, I began to hear those footsteps again, and I immediately panic and slam my window shut, lock it, put down the blinds, pull the curtains, jumped back into my bed, trying to process what just happened. After I calm down and get back to working on my computer, that's when I start to hear tapping on my window. And not just regular tapping. It was always 3 taps. Being an avid Ghost Adventures fan, I learned. I also learned that if something taps or knocks 3 times, then it's demonic. So I do my best to calm my beating heart and just act like I didn't hear it, which was a mistake on my part, because the taps went from light to heavy and just happened a few seconds apart, always being in 3s. My grandmother, who was in her bedroom down the hall from me, ended up hearing the tapping and came to my room to see if I heard it also, and I told her, yes, it's right outside my window. My grandmother, being the fearless woman she is, went to the back door, flipped the light on, and opened the door looking right down to where my bedroom window is, then looked at me and said, "Baby, there's nothing there." I ended up texting my cousin, who was upstairs at the time, asking if he heard it, and he said, "Yeah, but thought it was your grandma doing something downstairs making that noise." And I told him no, I was on the computer, and grandma was asleep. We weren't doing anything. A few minutes later, he texted me back, saying he went outside and looked and saw nothing. The tapping stopped, that I guess whatever it was didn't like that it caught the attention of my family. I still live in that house, and nothing like that has happened again, and honestly, I don't ever want it to. I hate to think that it was something demonic, and it was targeting me. I've always been sensitive to the other side. I won't dive into all of the occurrences I've had. Anyone interested can message me for stories. Anywhere from shadow figures, doppelgangers, Michigan Wolfmen, poltergeists, possible demons, and more. It's been a very interesting life. None of these stories include the random dangerous encounters with strangers either. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody listening to this or reading this is already rolling their eyes, much like I do from time to time. I digress. I am a 29-year-old female, and as recently as September of 2019, I purchased a house. It's an older home, built in the 1800s. It's sturdy and has plenty of rooms, 2 bedrooms upstairs and down. My room, the largest of all of them, has a walk-in closet the size of a small child's bedroom, a crawl space attic above that, and finally, at the back of the closet is a door to an unfinished, unused type of walk-in attic space. I wanted to turn it into a small reading nook in the future, but now my unease towards that area is becoming unresolvable. I almost never use my closet. I've noticed small things here and there that hinted at paranormal. Despite my sensitivity to the realm, I try to explain happenings rationally before outright jumping to demon in my house. Such things include shadows without a source, voices from my closet, items missing or moved, cold spots, bangs on walls, doors being closed that I'd left open, etc. Typical shit. A lot of these things can be explained by me just being forgetful, or the fact that the house is almost 200 years old. However, no touching until this morning. I'm a bartender. My night ends around 4 a.m. by the time I'm finished at work, get home, get ready, and into bed. I was lying in bed, sleep mask on, stories queued up and ready to sleep. I turned out my light and settled in. I was still wide awake and just getting comfortable. I'm a left side sleeper, and I'm stretched into my favorite position. Legs stacked, right foot behind the left with the inside of my foot touching the mattress. Imagine a very loose fetal position. So, I'm comfortable, and suddenly, I feel the sensation of a finger press gently into the inside of my right foot, the one against the mattress, and travel from my arch to my heel and sink away. I tried not to panic. I kept my breathing steady. I thought throughout every rational explanation I could come up with, and roll over. Similar position, opposite side. It didn't happen again, and I willed myself to sleep. As I mentioned before, I have seen and heard hints towards the paranormal, but only recently have these things escalated. This touch wasn't the first occurrence of it letting me know. It is, however, the first that I can't justify with a rational answer. The first time was before the light in the hall had been installed, so there was no light to go by. I just left my bathroom and stepped onto the landing of the stairs when I heard the shower door rattle and slide partially. My cat was steadily beside me, bouncing and chirping because I was headed downstairs, and at the noise, she stopped and turned to the bathroom. As I put my foot out to take a step down, I heard the landing behind me creak and groan, as the weight was being put on it, heavier than mine and painfully slow. I felt an agonizing sense of dread that someone was towering over me in my small hallway. However, I chose to ignore it, and just went down the stairs, with my girl eagerly racing me. I rationalized that it's an older home and creaks, but I still called my boyfriend and explained what happened on my way to work. He has seen and felt things here too, and I think that's why he doesn't stay the night much anymore. I know it's because I started doing renovations to the house. I'm trying to return it to the glorious old house it once was, with very minimal modern flair. The electricians used that crawl space in my closet to install the fixture above my stairwell, and I believe it woke something up. Something much more interested in me than I am in it. I live east of the great city of Atlanta, and the area around me has a very rich history, especially with the Civil War. One day, me and my friends decided to go to a place called Allatoona Pass. It's a long trail that has been converted for walking and used to be the site of the train tracks that ran through the town of Ackworth during the Civil War. In October of 1864, it was the site of a battle called the Battle of Allatoona Pass, when the Confederates attacked the Union held fort on top of the hill next to the tracks. The battle raged on for only a day and a half, and over 1,600 men perished before the Confederacy finally surrendered. Because so many perished, there have been legends for many, many years of it being haunted. This intrigued me and my then friends, and we went out to Allatoona Pass a little after midnight. We were wandering around and walking down the trail, talking to each other and exploring. After walking around for about 10 minutes, we reached the end of the open tunnel that runs to the mountain and decided to turn back. The names have been changed, but other than myself, there were 3 other people. We will call them Sandy, Corey, and Michael. While slowly making our way to the entrance of the tunnel, we started hearing movement above the 65-foot drop cliff, which makes up the sides of the tunnel, twigs snapping, rocks falling, and leaves being crushed. At this point, me and Sandy are clutching together, and Corey and Michael are following closely behind. Although he has never claimed to have a sixth sense, Corey, Sandy, and I also knew that Michael was able to see and hear things that none of us could. After deciphering the answers to a few questions that were asked, we were able to figure out that there were 3 Union soldiers near us. One was a man about 35 years old. One was a boy, about 17, and the third was a man who was about 23 years old. We were asking questions like, "Do you miss your family?" To which they would scream yes. "Do you want a cigarette?" To which one answered, "I just quit." And then finally, Michael said the older man said you don't have to be afraid of us, that we are protecting you from something in the distance. Once that was said, Sandy screamed and ran out of the tunnel, all of us following, kicking rocks, and running as fast as we could. Finally, we got to my truck, which was parked in the parking lot, and tried to calm our nerves. I threw down the tailgate, shaking, and sat down with Sandy and lit a cigarette to calm me down. As we were talking and laughing about how big of scaredy cats we are, Michael spoke up and said I'm going back in. After a minute of us refusing and pleading for him to stay with us, he picked up a bag and a big stick and walked back into the tunnel alone, and we watched, worried as he disappeared into the darkness. A few minutes later, he comes back, stick in hand, and there is something different about him. He seemed overly happy and giddy, and then he spoke. "I know what was watching us," he said, smiling. I shivered because his smile creeped me out more than the tunnel, and we asked, "Okay, what was it?" After a short pause, he said Zozo. After that, we flew into the car and burned rubber to get out of there. I had heard many stories and researched about Ouija boards before this, so I knew of Zozo and what he was capable of. I have been back to Allatoona Pass since that night, both during the day and at night, but if I'm ever there at night, I will not enter the tunnel because I know what is lurking in the dark. I have heard many instances and even witnessed people using a Ouija board inside the tunnel, and I personally believe that the people using a Ouija board opened a portal for Zozo to come through and was never closed. Perhaps he can move freely between open portals, but who knows? All I know is that what I felt and heard that night was enough for me. I know most of us believe in ghosts. The question is, have you seen one? For years I've watched ghost shows like Ghost Adventures, but I never thought I'd see one. I've always just explained away bumps in the night. But here's 2 stories that, to me, still send shivers up my spine. Back in 2013, I had just turned 19, lived in a super small town in Alberta, Canada. That year, the rivers surrounding the town flooded. Homes were lost, as well as lives in surrounding communities. I believe this is what made the energy in these homes stronger. At the time, I was living with my boyfriend's family in a very old home, estimated about 112 years old at the time. It was just a small, typical farmhouse, moved into town from an unknown farm in Alberta. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, with a new add-on basement with 2 other bedrooms. Picture an old farmhouse, the very original hardwood floors, white crown moldings, very tight hallways, and small rooms. Me and my boyfriend's room was in the add-on basement. It was always freezing and very, very dark. Now, before I moved in his house, his mom used to witness a dark figure standing outside the house, just staring in through the windows at night. Whatever this thing was, would bang on the doors and exterior walls. Now, when anyone new would move in, that figure would then come in the house too. New neighbors moved in next door, and things started getting strange. Every day when everybody would get home from work, things would be moved around and rummaged through, but nothing would be taken. So we assumed the neighbors were coming in the house. One day, me and my boyfriend got home before anybody else, and like normal things were moved around. So we cleansed everything else and went downstairs to relax before bed. His family had 3 dogs at the time, and you could hear them walking around upstairs. We finally get ready for bed and lie down. All of a sudden, we hear somebody run around upstairs. Not the dogs walking around, but a person stomping. But none of the dogs were barking or getting upset. No one else was going to be home till 11 p.m. or later. We call his mom, asking if she had gotten home, and the answer was no. So my boyfriend jumps out of bed and grabs a shotgun, thinking somebody had broken into the house. He sweeps the house room to room, and nothing. No one but the dogs and us were there. As soon as we get back to lay down, after finding out no one was there, whatever had walked through the house before runs out. One day, I was staying at my boyfriend's sister's house for the night. This home she owns and is very haunted. Her daughters talk to a person named OG, scream and yell that this thing is scaring them. The motion sensor toys go off all the time, so on. Anyway, this night, I was just falling asleep on the couch, and out of the corner of my eye, something keeps moving in the kitchen, next to the living room. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, I wake up to a chill running down my spine. I go to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. As I walk into the kitchen, the overhead light flicks on, and I turn to tell the kids it's late and time for bed. But instead, I see a woman in a white dress. Her body was deformed. Her long dark hair was covering her face. Think the girl from The Grudge hair. Then as soon as the light flicked on, it goes off, and she's gone. This house is built next to an old, unmarked graveyard. All of the family has seen this woman walking through the house and the yard. I think it's evil, as the kids are so scared of it, and say she does mean things to them, and lives on the ceiling. Needless to say, those homes scare me, and everybody who lives in them. Are ghosts real? Well, now I know they are. It was Friday night, and had just gotten home from spending the whole day with Jay, who was my boyfriend at the time, and now is my husband. At the time, I lived with my mom, stepdad, triplet brothers in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. My family was going through some hard times, and that was all we could afford at the time. I shared the master room with the triplets, so each of us had a twin bed. 2 of the beds were on each side of the room, the third one under one bed that could be pulled out when needed, and the fourth, my bed, was at the foot of the second bed, making a backwards L shape. That faced the bedroom door. Fast forward to about 11:30 p.m. We say our goodnights and go to bed. Exhausted from my long day, I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. Now this is where things get scary. I can't exactly remember if I was dreaming or not, but I do remember clear as day waking up to find what felt like someone pinning me down with their hands, one on each shoulder and their knee in the middle of my back. I could feel my blood running with fear. As I lay there frozen, it leaned over and whispered, "Are you awake?" I felt paralyzed, couldn't seem to move or open my eyes. I tried to scream, but all my efforts were useless. Even though I couldn't move, I did feel like I was going to shit myself. That's how scared I was. I again heard the same creepy, sinister voice say, this time in a loud whisper, "I know you're awake." Again, I try to move, but all I can do is pray. As I'm praying for this to stop, I hear the most evil, malicious, vile laugh I have ever heard in my life. I could hear my heart and blood racing. I slowly start gaining control of myself. I manage to sit up. It's dark, but the outside light is bright enough to where you can see where everything is. And that's when I see him, or it. The shadow of a man in what looks to be a trench coat. Now I can't really say in detail what it or he looked like, because it looked like a shadow walking by, and just like that it disappeared. About 5 minutes go by, and I'm now sitting up. I look over at the triplets, and they're all sound asleep. Now I know you guys may think I had some type of sleep paralysis, but I know for sure that was not the case. The next morning, I joined my parents for breakfast when I start telling them about my terrifying experience. The story grabs one of my brothers, we'll call him Chris, attention. As I continue with my story, Chris starts walking towards us, and before I could tell them about the evil laugh, he blurts out, "The laugh! You heard the laugh! It was an evil, manly laugh. It made me jump out of my sleep. But when I looked over there was nobody. I closed my eyes again and heard movement on your side of the room, so I peeked, and I just saw you sitting up. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't even sure myself what that was." Shivers went down my spine. Everyone was freaking out, thinking someone might have broke in. We double-checked everywhere for signs of a break-in and found nothing. We have since moved and are living better lives, but if anyone has ever had an experience similar to mine, I would love to hear it. Or if you have an idea on what it could have been, please, I'd like to know. I also forgot to mention that prior to this happening, my upstairs neighbor committed suicide, and he wasn't found till about a week later. This all started at least a week ago. I felt so horribly sick. I couldn't keep down anything without extreme nausea, let alone food. I've lost quite a bit of weight. My head had migraine-level headaches. I felt so miserable, depressed, every waking moment of that week. I grew up in with a whole family who works in the medical field, so I knew you should only worry about a migraine after 15 days. On the last day, I felt my worst. Like running to the bathroom, feeling seconds from throwing up kind of bad. My head hurt so much, I couldn't function. I kept seeing flashes and things darting from the corner of my vision. I would go into these trances where all I could do was stare. I felt so confused and dizzy all week. Emotionally, I was distraught. It got to the point to where I was lying down in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably and praying for the pain to go away. I had put toothpaste all over my nose and upper lip to ease the nausea, and I eventually fell asleep. I kept shivering and twitching uncontrollably, but not quite like a seizure until I fell asleep. I had a very vivid dream. All I saw was blackness, but I heard so much more. I heard a strong voice say, "I call upon the Archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael." And I might have heard something like ethereal as well, but it all happened so fast I couldn't mentally jot them all down. Then I heard several voices all around me, saying things like, "You're going to be okay. It's all over. The suffering is over." Then I woke up, sitting up and alert. Absolutely no pain or agony. I felt safe and went back to sleep immediately. I woke up later the same morning and I felt refreshed. Just in case, I went all day without eating until I had one slice of bread about an hour ago. I feel a little tired, but much better than yesterday. My stomach hurts a little and feel like shivering as I type this, but every time I stop to take care of some other responsibility, I felt fine. I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm just glad that it's over.